Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin, great to see you again on screen, sir. Thanks for giving us some time.
Thank you very much, Amitabh, for providing me this opportunity to interact through you to your growing number of viewers.
Ambassador, when you talk about the diplomatic victories that you and your team and other Indian diplomats have been responsible for in the not so distant past, Kulbhushan Jadhav at the ICJ. Now, there have been, of course, that's not it is a UN body, but that was one significant victory in terms of the case that India was fighting.
So we need to see this in terms of international law and India's willingness to engage in ensuring that the norms of international law are met. And that's the bigger picture from a perspective of growth of international law. Here is a country which is large but is willing to engage globally in pursuit of global values. And the decision of the ICJ is a reiteration of our faith in international law, in global institutions, and that global institutions can be invoked even in cases of individual rights. And that's the victory in terms of Kulbhushan Jadhav's case at the ICJ. You could go to the UN website where it says in categorical terms that the ICJ has decided that Pakistan should do ABCD. So it's quite clear in that.
Another diplomatic victory that you and your team led was the Masood Azhar case, where finally China lifted its hold on him being designated as a terrorist.
So again, I look at it as a diplomat. I look at it in terms of, can international institutions be harnessed to address issues of our times? No issue is as important to ordinary people as terrorism is. And if international institutions cannot even normatively act, they will be held to account by the broader public. And the decision by the United Nations Sanctions Committee in terms of addressing this and imposing sanctions on Masood Azhar as a globally designated terrorist is a response that, again, international norms can be harnessed in the quest for greater peace and security. Both these are different facets of the same issue. One in terms of an individual whose rights need to be protected under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. The other in terms of a threat to peace and security that he is posing to hundreds or perhaps thousands of people in a different country, and he needs to be sanctioned. So in both cases, international law has sided, or India has been successful in utilizing the available avenues of international law to promote the interests of our people. And that's the bigger picture in this, rather than the nitty-gritty of this.
If I come to UN peacekeeping now, Ambassador, now India has been since 1948 been playing such a large role. If you look at the bigger picture there, it is the largest number of missions provided by India, the largest number of total personnel, and unfortunately, the largest number of casualties and those people killed outside the borders of India. Now, SNI has been reporting extensively on one country, South Sudan, and we've seen how our boys there have been doing so well. Your comments on peacekeeping and India's role?
So, India has always seen peacekeeping as a tangible contribution to international peace and security, where we are providing troops in a tangible manner to promote international peace and security. And this, as you listed, is a tradition for us. It goes back to the time where we first participated in the Suez peacekeeping operation in 1956, and since then. But participation is one thing, but innovation is another thing. And we've always been in the forefront of innovation for peacekeeping. So, for example, way back in the 1960s, when we participated in Congo, in the first Congo operation, you know, how greatly we regard peacekeeping is demonstrated by the fact that the first Param Vir Chakra for an Indian soldier fighting beyond the borders of India was to Captain Salaria, who actually pioneered the process of helping beyond what are required in terms of ordinary norms of duty. He actually pioneered in some ways protection of civilians. This was a concept unknown to international peacekeeping in the 60s. It is only much later in Bosnia, Rwanda, and subsequent operations that protection of civilians became a norm. But Captain Salaria, as well as many Indian soldiers, way back in the 60s, were already doing that without knowing that this was to be a global norm decades later. So we have a tradition of setting norms. You can see we were the first to provide women peacekeepers in Liberia. And that has had such a demonstration effect in terms of not only other peacekeeping operations, but in terms of societies where they have worked seen as role models. In societies such as in Liberia, the former president is on record as having said that these women, they were just, for example, guarding the presidential palace. She said that this has had such an impact on women in their societies that they could also stand up for gender parity and has a much broader societal impact than only on peacekeeping. Again, recently, we are now providing female engagement teams of our troops, women who are going out with men in engagement teams, and the response that they are generating is just enormous. So we have a proud tradition. We are always innovating. We are always at the forefront of setting new challenges and accomplishing them. And we owe actually peacekeeping is one of the greatest contributions that India has done to international peace and security. It needs to be known more. We need to project that much more in our own society of what our brave young women and men are doing in distant areas. We have nothing to gain tangibly directly from it, but for our support for international peace and security is the only tangible gain that we have as a country which stands in solidarity with the international community in promoting international peace and security.
Right, Master, you're referring to the latest one is MONUSCO there. But when you talk about the current mandates and how protection of civilians is one of the key pillars there, talking about the mandates, now the UN does authorize TCCs or troop contributing countries to be involved in when the mandate is actually approved, but that's not really happening on the ground.
You're right. There are actually explicit provisions in the UN Charter which provide for all stakeholders, including troop contributing countries, to provide their inputs. Now, it's not only good policy, but it is good practice if they do that, because who knows better what is happening on the ground than those people who are on the ground. That said, unfortunately, you're right that the Security Council is a closed club which doesn't want any inputs, but it's only to their disadvantage that the situation is such that if you don't get good inputs, you will not benefit for it. For example, in Congo, increasingly the number of troops are being reduced, which is fine if that is what is required. However, the situation on the ground shows that what you are asking for is virtually impossible for the people on the ground to deliver. So there is a growing cleavage between what is required on the ground and what is theoretically being pursued by the Security Council. It's not good for anyone that this cleavage continues to grow. We when we join the Security Council in 2021-22, will make a further push that effective decision making requires better coordination, better consultation among troop contributing countries and the Council, because we will bring the perspective of troop contributing countries right into the heart of the Council's decision making as a member in the Council during the years 21-22.
And if you can take that to enlarge it even further, Ambassador, would India and other countries be also looking at, since there are so many peacekeeping missions in Africa, to involve the African countries more when the mandate is actually set up?
Yes, there is a growing feeling that the wearer knows where the shoe bites. And obviously, if there are large number of peacekeeping operations on the African continent, Africans themselves should be able not only to provide inputs, but should be involved in decision making. And that's the bigger quest where India and Africa are working together in terms of the reform of the Security Council itself. We cannot have a structure which was designed in 1945, doesn't reflect today's realities, either in terms of power equations or in terms of geographical diversity, take decisions on matters of life and death for our future. That's a quest that we have in common with Africa. We support Africa's aspirations. We support Africa's quest for a better say and to right what are clearly historical injustices, both in the case of Africa and in the case of India. We were not on the table when these decisions were made, or in our case, we were at the table, but as a country which was colonized, not having the say which independent India has. Life has changed since then, and for the world itself, we need to have a governance structure which reflects today's realities.
Ambassador, you yourself have been bringing up the issue of funds that are due to nations, especially in peacekeeping. Of course, there's a larger picture involved on UN dues itself. India, if I pulled out the May numbers, is all that I could get. 38 million is what we were owed as one of the largest. But you were bringing up the issue of, say, countries like Rwanda, who have such a high presence of a troop in terms of contribution, not getting their dues, and in fact, their dues being about 100 or maybe 200 times what they are expected to pay to the UN.
Yes, this is been an issue that we've pursued vigorously over the last, say, 8-10 months. And I'm happy to tell you, there are now solutions that have been worked on, and you will see things improve in the next 6 months. For example, previously, each peacekeeping operation funding was in a silo, in the sense, if somebody was not funding for a specific peacekeeping operation, but there was a surplus in another, you could not just shift or cross-borrow, and therefore, in cases where there were huge dues in big peacekeeping operations, that's where the problem was arising for us largely in South Sudan and Congo. Now the General Assembly has just earlier this month approved a solution where the Secretary General is able to use the whole peacekeeping fund as one pool. And that will enable him to ameliorate the situation of huge dues to any country or the other. We hope that in the next 6 months, this problem that we had raised in the past is a problem of the past. So sometimes it's useful to make the noise, to attract attention, and to get solutions done. And this is one concrete example of that.
Another concrete example of how India can be so proud is the appointment of Lieutenant General Tinaikar as the force commander in South Sudan, though, of course, all UN peacekeeping missions are supposed to have as part of those pillars impartiality and neutrality. Though on the ground, I've seen certain countries, including China, involve their strategic interests even in that sphere. But General Tinaikar's appointment after a while as a force commander is something to be proud of. Especially though I heard that the Chinese were trying to get their own nominee, but that didn't happen.
The UN is a competitive space, and we always have to pursue our interests as a country at the headquarters. Our troops will perform their duties with due diligence as international peacekeepers. But that said, I think it is only correct that countries which provide large number of troops also have their nationals in leadership positions, especially if they meet all such requirements. General Tinaikar is one of our most outstanding soldiers who we have offered to the UN, and we are grateful that in one of the largest peacekeeping operations, now we have an Indian heading it. India has a long tradition again of providing outstanding soldiers to UN peacekeeping. We have had many force commanders in the past, and this time we are grateful that a large peacekeeping operation will be headed by an Indian force commander, a soldier who is brought not only glory to his country, but has been an exceptional international peacekeeper. General Tinaikar has served in 2 peacekeeping operations on the African continent. This is his third stint. So he brings to the table a wealth of experience on peacekeeping. Also, you have seen that Indian peacekeepers who have served elsewhere have served with distinction within their national forces too. Our present Chief of Army Staff, General Rawat, had served in Congo. So we send out our best, we provide the UN our best, and we are confident they do a sterling job.
Ambassador, you've talked about Security Council reforms and the larger picture. Now, where do they currently stand? Do you see any hope in terms of something concrete, what India and other countries want in terms of those reforms, either getting more countries on board or the veto process? Do you see that really happening since it's not happened for so long in our lifetimes?
Nobody... Amitabh, let me tell you that nobody reforms unless there's a crisis. Neither do individuals reform, nor do countries reform, nor do international organizations reform. Unlike we are all in the digital age today, and it's very easy to update software. If you have an iPhone, you just press update and the second version comes. Unfortunately, international organizations are 1.0 in terms of their templates. That said, I do not hope that it should take another cataclysmic crisis to effect change. Otherwise, human beings will lose all hope in human ingenuity and only look for cataclysmic crisis to effect changes. As far as India is concerned, whenever that change happens, we are confident that there will not be a change without India being on the high table. Gone are the days where you could ignore 1 billion people. Today's day and age, when the UN says they represent we the people, it is only legitimate that we have aspirations of serving on the high table because we represent 1/6 of humanity. Now, if your question is, this is certainly an aspirational goal, we will pursue with it. And as an aspirational country, we should have lofty aspirational goals. And that's what keeps us wanting to change, wanting to improve. And as I said, whenever it happens, all of us should be confident that they cannot be changed without us. Change happens slowly. Sometimes it happens by chance. So don't give up hope. Hope springs eternal in the chest of those who pursue peace and justice. This was what Plato said. And on that hopeful note, I will tell you that don't lose hope. There is always hope. We will push this. Whenever it happens, it will only happen for our better, because our own status in the global community has only risen. In my career as a diplomat, I have seen that happen. And if change is moving much faster, there's always hope that the future is better than the past.
But that hope, is it downgraded a little bit by what the situation on the ground is? Correct me if I'm wrong, but on the ground is the General Assembly 2015, which you're working on. But it's being, because of this food for thought process that is being put in by various countries, that's where it's being stalled, because you're not being able to move forward in the reform process.
So I think you look, let's step back and look at the global picture. The global picture today is one of competition rather than one of cooperation, one of conflict rather than one of collaboration. In a global picture, what is required for any change to happen is a willingness to cooperate, a willingness to collaborate. That, unfortunately, has only worsened in the last 2 years. Or the last few years, if I may say. So we will need to be cognizant of what is happening globally, that things in a global environment have only deteriorated rather than have enhanced cooperation. So the global climate today is a climate that diplomats like me have never seen anything like. And I speak from more than 3.5 decades of experience. The situation is so unpredictable that what we have seen in the past doesn't help us understand what is going to happen in the future. We keep our fingers crossed, but as diplomats, we always need to be hopeful and optimistic.
Ambassador Akbaruddin, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Amitabh.